The Barcode Podcast is presented by Titanium CPG Insurance. Titanium protects forward-thinking consumer brands with a range of commercial insurance products and risk management services designed specifically for natural and organic food and beverage companies. Learn more online at titaniumcpg.com. Welcome to the Barcode Podcast, where we equip emerging consumer brands. I'm your host, Ben Ponder, and at Barcode, we're here to give our listeners the knowledge and tools you need to thrive in the marketplace. In an omnichannel world, almost every brand will work with a major wholesale distributor at some point. On this episode, we're sharing a recording from a live event we held earlier this year featuring Suman Lawrence of United Natural Foods, the U.S.'s largest natural grocery distributor. Suman runs the UNFI Next program for the Southwest region of the country, so she specializes in onboarding early-stage brands and mentoring them toward success. Your distribution partnerships are among the most important in your business, and there's a lot of information packed into this episode, but Suman shares some really great specific advice on how you can get this relationship off on the right foot. So we're really thankful that Suman joined us all the way from North Texas, Dallas. So we're going to talk a little bit about distribution, although the conversation may go in a few different directions because she has not only and ever worked in distribution, she's worked in a variety of roles across really the food and grocery ecosystem. And I think that diversity of experience is one of her big advantages and allows her to have a lot of empathy for you because she's been where you are and she has seen, she sat on multiple sides of the table. There's not just two sides of the table, but a lot. So she has kind of grew up in the UK, born in India, grew up in the UK, and then moved to Dallas or Texas at some point along the way, and has worked for companies and brands that you have heard of on the retail side, such as Central Market and United Supermarkets, and also worked on the brand side at Hail Mary. And she understands a lot of those things. So some of you, you probably have heard the term UNFI Next. A couple of people have brought this up. I'm gonna ask just at the beginning, and we'll dig into some other details. But Suman, tell us what is UNFI Next and what's your role with it?
So UNFI Next is a small division of the supplier management team. So it's about 3 years old. And we started because we found that a lot of small emerging brands were having difficulty acclimating to distribution with the national team. National team are all category driven, so one person's going to do all snacks. We are territory driven, so we have the 6 of us in the company, and we each have a region that we manage, and we try and onboard smaller suppliers.
So you're the Southwest region.
So I'm the South region.
The South region. What states does that include?
So think of Oklahoma, Texas, all the way to North Carolina and south. So that I cover all those states.
And how do you cover all those states?
So
you're on the phone a lot, I suspect.
I am on the phone a lot, but I network with accelerator groups, broker groups, network with CPG companies. We go to shows, word and mouth from other suppliers who've had a good experience. We work with retailers. Whole Foods sends us many our way. So that's how we network. We don't get out as much as I would like to. We work with commercial kitchens, anything that's going to get our name out there. And then we get a vetting process where people fill in a questionnaire. We kind of look at it to see what stage that company's at. We'll have a call with them and then decide whether it's something we want to move forward with or not. So some of the things that Next is looking for, emerging brand, is not national, is not at UNFI, and it can be an emerging brand. You maybe have been in business in 6, 7 years or 8 years, but you're coming into a different channel of business, right? So maybe you're concentrating on food service, suddenly you now want to go into the natural industry. And then we kind of see if you're going to you have the groundwork to be successful down the road, because our goal is to onboard you, mentor you, grow you, graduate you. And so hopefully in 2 years, you'll graduate to the national team. We manage 50 to 60 suppliers with the goal of graduating every year and then onboarding every year. And so national team can manage 200 suppliers, and that could be multiple brands under that one supplier. So they don't have the time that they would like to dedicate to each supplier. So they can't deal with a lot of suppliers that need a lot of information, don't know what deduction is, who should they go to if they can't fill their POs. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of talking, a lot of hand-holding, a lot of explaining, so that they can, by the time 2 years comes around, they're ready. They're grown up, basically, and can stand on their own feet.
So speaking of explaining, one of the things that we try to do here at Barcode is to not assume like a baseline level of knowledge about anything. And so UNFI is United Natural Foods Incorporated, correct? Which is a tiny little mom and pop organization. No, it's not. It's tell us what is UNFI?
So United Natural Foods, it started as a little mom and pop, sort of mountain people, but basically in the 70s, and then slowly started acquiring different distribution countries across the country, and then became United Natural Foods. So United Natural Foods, prior to Super Value acquisition that just happened couple of months, well, it's probably been a good 6 months now. We were about an $8 billion company. We had about 10,000 employees. Now we're
about like you, right? Similar.
Yeah, so double. And so about 18 distribution centers across the country. In the past, we've been known as the natural organic distributor, but we've slowly become natural organic, fresh foods, perishables, specialty, now going into the conventional side too of it. So that the CEO's motto is, we want to fill the store. Use one distributor, fill the store. So that's what it's slowly aiming.
Right. So it's a very large. It's the largest of the natural foods distributors, and with a national footprint. The Super Value acquisition that she's referring to was they bought a chain of grocery stores that also was a distributor as well.
Right.
So they bolted that on. There was a lot of employees there, and that's
and
what you're
the
referring
reason it was a surprise to many, but one of the reasons behind Super Value acquisition is because they had conventional, and they had areas of the store that we couldn't supply, and so it was a good marriage, because now that every section of the store can now sort of become reality.
Right. Okay. So Suman is she's managing these emerging brands who are like many of you. You're trying to get going. So what she said before, you're not, one prerequisite is you can't already have been in UNFI and working with a national supplier relationship manager at
you can only have one supplier relationship manager, whether it's a supplier relationship manager, which is the national team, or it's a SDM, supplier development manager.
Right. So every distributor has their own, like any company, they have their own nomenclature. And so at UNFI, you're going to work with either a supplier development manager like you or a supplier relationship manager if you are in a particular category, right? So what are some of the things, like just to save you some time, what are some of the things that you find yourself saying again and again to brands who go, hey, Suman, why didn't you take my why didn't you accept my application into the program? What was I missing? Why didn't I get the call?
So next we look at the product, right? We look at the category the product is in, and then we look at, is the category trending or about to trend, right? So we're not going to say yes to a product where there's a decline. For an example, there was a sports drink that came to me recently, and it looked interesting, but then I reached out to our category management team that looks at movement across the country, looks at trends, looks at spins, and I said, hey, what do you think of this one? And they go, hey, hydration drinks are going negative. They don't have any attributes that are still selling well, and so those are some of the reasons. It could be price point. It could be your experience in the retail environment. You're brand new. You've only been around for 6 months, and you're in 10 stores. I'm going to say, no, you're not ready for distribution. Come back in a year, and here's some of the things I'd like you to do before you come back to me. Your price point could be too high. You're not competitive. You don't have a structure or a plan for the next year or two. What channel do you want to go after? You know, they go, we want to be national in 6 months. And I'm like, no, this is not going to work. Concentrate. What channel do you want to go to? Do you want to go attack food service? Do you want to attack natural? What do you want to concentrate on, and how are you going to start doing it? Another reason, which is quite common, is people think the distributor is going to do all your selling. We're not going to do all your selling. That's the first thing I tell anyone. What's your sales team look like? What's your outreach? Have you got a broker community? Because if you think getting into distribution is the end and that you're going to start making money or you're going to start getting velocity, that's just the beginning of it all. And so that's really important to understand.
That's really crucial advice, because you do see, on one level, you should celebrate, hey, I got into UNFI,
Yes.
or I got into a given retailer, and you should take a moment, give each other a high five, but then really that's where the whole thing starts, is making sure that you are prepared to support it and do whatever it takes to sell a lot of that product through UNFI and through their retail partners.
And there's many factors that, and I've had many. I've just started with a supplier that I've been talking to for a full year, and they're finally ready. So a full year, they finally got it together, which was exciting. And so now we're starting the paperwork. But it can take time, you know. I would say the majority of my suppliers, unless they have key accounts that want them to come through UNFI, it's a good 6 to 9 months before we actually start looking at paperwork, because there's some homework to be done. They haven't thought of their pricing. They haven't thought of how freight affects their pricing, what their wholesale is going to look like, what the suggested retail is going to look like, how their pricing to customers are going to vary, depending which customer they go after, how much promotion they may have to do. So there's so many factors that you don't know until you start talking to people, and then they say, oh, what about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So
Right, that's good. And so I want to break that down just a little bit for you guys. So typically, you will, when you work with a distributor like UNFI, you'll fill out a very elaborate set of Excel spreadsheets, right? And get used to it. That's a mark of success. If you're getting more spreadsheets, Goalie's filled out a lot of spreadsheets. You want to fill out spreadsheets, although it can be painful at times. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is, they're going to ask you for 2 prices. The first one is FOB, or freight on board, and one is delivered. So tell us a little bit about how does a company decide what's the price, even kind of dig into that a little bit. How do I decide what the price is to UNFI, and what are the other considerations that I need to make around that for retailers, et cetera?
right. So you guys, hopefully, as you're developing your product, you're looking at your competition, right? If there is competition in that category, you're looking at where the competition is, what suggested retails they've got on the shelf, and everything. So you want to look at that and then figure out if you can be within that ballpark, and then go backwards in a sense. So let's just say $4.99 is your ideal spot you feel that you could sell the products at. Then you have to think about, okay, $4.99 on the shelf, got to take minus the retail margin and make sure you know.
Which is different for every category, right?
Yes.
Every retailer, every
And every
category is a
category.
little bit different. And then, okay,
So then you come to the pricing, hopefully that the retailer is going to buy it through a distributor. And then you have to go backwards and look at what is the distributor need, what does the distributor buy it, and what is the margin the distributor is going to put on that category. So is it going to be 26%, 28%, 30%, you know? So there's a couple of different categories. There's grocery, which is dry, ambient, usually your cheapest margin. There's chilled, there's frozen, there's supplements, there's body care, and then there's bulk. So those are sort of the main categories that we look at. Chilled and frozen are going to be your highest margin, because we have to bring it in chilled, store it chilled, deliver it chilled.
And all of that costs money.
And that costs money. And it's also the tightest space in any warehouse. Frozen and chilled. And chilled, I will tell you, is the most innovative category also. You find so many products in chilled, and there's only so much space in a retail store for chilled products, so it's very competitive. So you have to do...
Why is that? Why is there so much innovation in chilled?
Because maybe it's because they think it's fresh, the taste is more vibrant, people grab and goes and things. I mean, there's so many,
Yeah, it's often the perimeter of the store, which helps.
Fresh, and so, it's got categories like dairy, yogurts, fresh juices, all the things that people will buy often.
And you see that a lot, too, with a lot of the natural brands begin adding fewer and fewer preservatives. And so, therefore, you in order to
You've got the
preserve
bars,
the shelf life.
So, there's now bone broth. So there's so many things, hummus, and all that is all chilled. And so that's where people want, because people gravitate to buy that often and use. So you have to think it. So you've now gone through two different margin scenarios, and then you come to this price point where you think, okay, I need to be in that ballpark in order for the margin, for the distributor to have their margin, and then they need to be selling it at a certain price point in order for the retailer to have their margin, and in order for my SRP to be this. And so there's a flexibility of so many percentage, because each retailer may be buying it at a different price from the distributor because of the volume they do with us. Whole Foods is not going to get the same pricing as a little mom and pop store.
That's a really important point.
Yeah,
so if you assume that the mom and pop store that's getting their products from UNFI or any other distributor is getting the same deal as a Whole Foods or another large account, that's not the case. So that means that it can be a little tight for some of those smaller retailers.
So there's really three variables when you look at pricing, and it can make it hard for you. So there's the freight is the variable. So meaning, if we're going to pick up from you, are we going to...
That's the FOB.
FOB. I think it's called free on board, I think is what it's the FOB. So if we come and pick up from you, are you going to... And we deliver it to the warehouse. Are you going to help us with the freight, or are we going to do the freight in-house? If we do the freight in-house, meaning we don't get any support from the supplier for the freight, and we will add the freight to your cost of goods, and then that will be your landed price at the warehouse. So let's just say $1 FOB, 10 cents freight. The landed cost at your warehouse is going to be $1.10. Then we add the category margin, and that becomes your wholesale price.
And this is a really important point, because many of you who have filled out like Whole Foods paperwork, for instance, you'll see in that Whole Foods paperwork it says typically UNFI cost plus 8%. That does not include the freight. Right, so if you did that backwards math and you said, okay, I've taken care of everything, but you didn't anticipate or allocate any dollars for the freight cost, then you could get into trouble there.
You can, and if your product is heavy, that freight can do a lot. So, for example, a case of water, freight can be $5 because a case of water can weigh 28 pounds, and the freight is calculated by pound. So there's a lot of, and so then that's going to affect your wholesale price, and then it's going to affect the suggested retail price.
And in general, freight costs, we're at a particular crunch now for a variety of different reasons that we won't get into around supply of trucks and truckers and all of this sort of stuff. Freight prices are going up. They rarely go down, truth be told.
So you can either do FOB, but if you think the freight is too much, then you'll have to look at delivered. And then do you deliver the products to our warehouses? And then you'd have to take care of delivery as you grow to every single warehouse.
So for most of you, if you were delivering locally, that would be to Lancaster, Texas for UNFI.
And so in delivery, there's an additional charge. You have to make an appointment, unloading fees, and a lumper fee, third party. We do not allow any of the carriers to unload anything. So those are all things that you have to make sure you take into consideration when working on your pricing.
Which is also an important point, too. If you ever find yourself in this situation, because I did once, I'd never heard of a lumper before I got into this business until I found myself at a dock trying to do this sort of thing. And they only take cash. Like you often like you have just do your homework beforehand.
Yeah, for new suppliers, it's usually cash. Once you've got into a routine and you can do credit, or if you've got a good carrier, they can do it on your behalf and then they'll charge you back. So those are just some very basic things, but those little things will really affect your pricing. The other thing that I see a lot of suppliers do is they base their pricing on one retailer. Let's just say it's Whole Foods. They've gone backwards and they go, oh, Whole Foods landed plus 8%. I'm going to do all my pricing. So then what happens is those small mom and pops or the other retailers that don't get as much of a discount, it's too expensive for them. They can't compete. So when I was saying there's a couple of variables, your freight is going to be a variable. Margin internally is going to be a variable in the sense that our pricing to the retailer is going to be a variable. The more volume a retailer does, the better the pricing from UNFI. And then the third variable that's going to be is the margin that the retailer takes. So they could have a great pricing from UNFI, but maybe they take a 40 margin. Or another retailer can have a decent pricing from UNFI, but they only take a 30 margin. So all those things, kind of try and understand the retailers you're targeting and what kind of pricing they are looking at, and then try and see if you can come to a middle ground. So maybe you're a little cheaper for the bigger customers, but you're not outrageously high for the smaller customers.
And so when we talk about pricing, talk a little bit about the difference. So if your product is effectively the same as everything else on the shelf, how would you price that versus if you're the most innovative, exciting thing out there and you have premium ingredients and everything is organic and biodynamic and all the other things, is there any wiggle room for additional?
So consumers are, depending the market you're looking for. So the natural consumers, the organic consumer, lifestylers, as I would say, they do look at attributes, right? They look at attributes, they look at ingredients, and so you do have wiggle room in there. If you're saying you're non-GMO verified or you're organic or you're sustainable, biodynamic or something, then they understand there's a cost involved in doing that business, and so they are willing to pay a bit more. However, if you're in a brand new category that is so innovative, there's a lot of education that has to be gone into it. So you can't have a price point that's not even going to get somebody interested because you think, I'm the first in this category and I can do it at this price. You still have to be in a reasonable price that with a bit of education, they're willing to buy it or try and buy it.
And there are always outliers to all of these things, right? So I think the first time I saw a Blueprint juice on Juice Cleanse on the shelf, it was like $97. You're like, wow, that's a high price for juice. But it's so there is a little bit of wiggle room depending on how innovative you are, but you can't be so you can't say that my protein bar is $20 each at retail. That's probably not going to drive trial so much. Right. So what have you seen? Just tell us some best practices or stories of where someone worked with UNFI, or maybe it's another distributor, with great success. Like somebody who maybe they weren't huge in the beginning, but they really did what they needed to do to grow the business in the right way, so that both businesses were successful.
So there's a nice supplier I used to cover the Rocky Mountain territory before they realigned us, and so there was a nice chilled product that they asked a ton of questions. They asked so many questions, and they were very, very methodical. Like they were saying, okay, tell me about this scenario. And they would literally work out the different scenarios, have their target retailers that they'd like to go after. And then they just say, okay, if we got into one region of Whole Foods and we estimate, this category does so many. And so they really slowly did it, but they did their homework and they ramped up accordingly. And so they now are national. And they've done really well, and so they've graduated. But they said no to quite a few accounts too. They said, no, we're not ready for that region. We want to concentrate on this region first, and really saturated.
Talk more about that, because that's a common pitfall for emerging brands is you say, Safeway Albertsons wants to take me national, and I just started 6 months ago. Isn't this great news?
Yes, so I am very cautious for brands to get into a lot of distribution. I'd rather you concentrate on one area, unless, of course, you come on board with National Whole Foods or something, or Natural Grocers works out. But so every time you go into distribution, there's a cost involved, right? There's a cost of bringing that inventory into the warehouse. There's activation fees, there's promotion fees, and there's your inventory itself. And you have to support that DC by certain cases, every case. So for us, a grocery item has to do an average of 5 cases per item per distribution center.
How often?
A week. And it's an average of 13 weeks rolling. So chilled and frozen, more like 7 cases. That's the minimum you need to do to stay active. It doesn't guarantee that you'll stay active. If a DC has a space capacity, they're going to start looking at the bottom 5% and start cutting, even if you're doing well. For a next supply, I'm like, that's really good. Sorry, don't have space, gone. So you really have to get moving. So don't stretch yourself too thin, because you're going to need money. You're basically going to need money to promote your product in that one DC. You're going to need money to support free fills, discounts, whatever, to get your product on the shelf. You're going to need money to do marketing. So if you stretch yourself too thin, you'll find that your deductions are outweighing your income. And that's really important. It's great. Oh, and then the other thing, find out when you do go to a retailer, find out what do they expect of you. Meaning, what is their placement policy? Is it slotting? Is it one free case? What is it? First, find that out. What is their expectations on promotion in a year? What do they expect from you there? And then also find out I always tell my suppliers, find out what their reclaim policy is. Do they have a guarantee reclaim policy with the UNFI? Or do they have a 2% spoils allowance? Because if your product doesn't sell, they'll just send it back for a credit at UNFI, and it'll come back to you.
So let's pause a second. Let me decode a few of those pieces. The Barcode Podcast is produced by Barcode Media, where our purpose is to equip emerging consumer brands. Go to barcodestartup.com to learn more about what we do. While you're there, you can also read full transcripts of podcast episodes, as well as get additional tools to help you grow your consumer packaged goods business. Now back to the episode. So free fill is when you go into some retailers. Typically there's like two big buckets. Retailers are taking a risk on you, even the distributor's taking a risk in taking on your new thing, your new brand, your new product, your new whatever. And so part of the way they de-risk that is that they will ask for a free case, for instance, let's say a free case per store per SKU to get on the shelf. Now, again, you have to do the math and make sure you can afford that. Slotting fees are other fees that it's a general term that you use, that's used often in grocery for any fee that a retailer charges a brand to get onto the shelf. So that could take a lot of different forms. It actually could be related to like, you have to advertise in this circular. You have to do a number of different things. But if you don't do what we say, and maybe that costs you $25,000, maybe it costs you whatever, you're not playing ball. So you have to understand that, so Suman's point is you have to ask those questions up front to say, what are your expectations of us in order to go into this account? Because they're not just doing it for free.
No, and if you don't ask, they'll think you know. They'll assume you know, right? And slotting fee can be $1,000 a SKU, right, an item. But then ask, okay, how long does that guarantee me, spot in that store? Is it 3 months, 6 months, a year? How long does it, So just ask a lot of questions, because the more you understand, the more you can prepare and budget and do all the analysis you need to do. If you don't if you don't ask, it's going to come as a surprise when you get this massive deduction.
Right, so we're going to get to that one in a second. But so
The favorite thing.
reclamation, two other words before we get to deduction, reclamation and spoilage. So reclamation, what is that?
Full reclaim, meaning you're pretty much guaranteeing your products.
So what you're saying to the retailer and distributor is, if my product doesn't sell within the time frame that I've allocated in my paperwork, and maybe there's
or the shelf life, it goes out of date.
Yeah, out of date means, again, whatever that best by date that you put on there, they're actually sticking to that and they're checking it. And if it gets within, UNFI wants to have how many, let's say you had 180 days of shelf life, how many days does
Grocery 30 minimum.
Yeah, 30 minimum, but you typically UNFI wants it 75%
of your
of
shelf
that
life.
time. So if you produce, whatever product A, and it sits in your warehouse or your cooler, and it's going bad gradually, even if that's a very long time or a short time, UNFI will not check it into their warehouse unless they have 75% of the full
Of your
shelf
production
life,
shelf life.
of the production shelf life. So that means you can't be producing necessarily for something that's going to potentially spoil relatively quickly. You can't produce like, I'll just produce and keep it all here in a fridge.
I do have that conversation. I usually, if they're saying, we're with co-packers and we can produce lots more, a lot of times when people say, distribution, and I look at these questionnaires and I say, what is your minimum quantity? 7 pallets, 10 pallets. And I'm like, half a pallet probably what I'm going to buy at the beginning. So, don't think just because you've got into a distributor, it's going to be a massive amount of products that you're going to start selling. Hopefully you will. But,
you want to ramp that up because that 7 pallets might cost you several $1,000s. Right, and if it goes bad, that's on you.
Yeah, it's going to come back because there's a 6-month guarantee for all new suppliers at the very beginning anyway.
So full reclamation and then spoilage allowance. Talk about what that means.
So spoilage allowance is, I'll say it's like an escrow account in a sense. So spoilage is a certain percentage that you decide you're going to offer the distributor. It could be 1%, 2%. Let's just take 2%, which is quite common. So every invoice that you have, there's going to be a separate line that has 2% spoils allowance. So let's say the invoice was $100. We're going to pay you only $98 because $2 is going to go into that spoil allowance bucket. And that spoil allowance will keep accruing. Anytime there is a spoils that happens because it goes out of date or something. Let's say 2 cases goes out of date. We look into that bucket and we say, is there enough money to cover that spoils? It does, you'll never hear from us. However, at the end of the year, when there's a spoils allowance, if there is excess funds left, you do not get it back. You don't get it back.
Heads they win, tails you lose.
Yeah.
So,
but many people will use a spoils allowance because they feel comfortable knowing a certain percentage is going every time towards this bucket. And, we can definitely look at your spoils. If you are giving us 2%, but on average your spoils is only 1%, I'm honest, I'll say, you know what, go down to 1% and let's watch it, But if you're giving 2%, but your spoils is becoming 3%, 4%, then we need to look at why. What's going on? Did we buy too much inventory? Did you lose customers? Did you say we've got more customers than you really had? What is the cause of this, So there's many factors, but you have to decide what works for you. Do you want full reclaim, which you'll get deducted when it actually happens, or do you want to give a little bit of money every time?
Right. So did that make sense? You have to make a choice when you're filling out distributor paperwork, and you will check a box, and you're like, I'm just checking. It's like signing the Apple terms and conditions. You're like, sure, whatever. Like so you're going to check a box, and it's either they're deducting 2% every time, or it's all on you, and you have to make that call.
Hopefully you're working well with your SDM, you're working well with your buyer, and I'm at the first couple of months, I try and have monthly calls with my new suppliers, and we check, we look at inventory, we look at movement, we look at your accounts payable.
Which is awesome, by the way, because when you grow up to be a big brand, you don't necessarily get that level of handholding.
And then the calls go every bi-monthly sort of thing. But I want you to know, right? We're not the best distributor to share information. A lot of information is available, but it's at a cost, right? There's costs involved in reporting and everything. So for me, I try and help the small supply. I help you guys, because the last thing I want is your inventory to be sitting in the warehouse. That does nobody any good at all. Buyers also are judged on inventory turns, lost sales. So they also have to watch their inventory too. But Next team tries as much as we can to help you.
So another very important word that you brought up is deductions, and this is where, where brands and distributors get a little bit sideways with each other is often around the subject of deductions. So tell us what are deductions and how one avoids deductions.
So there are multiple facets to deductions. So there can be simple deductions.
So first of all, a deduction is something you're going to get a printout.
Right. So the first one you'll see, well, deductions normally so you'll get a check statement, right? You'll get a check statement, and on the check statement, you'll have your total, but above it, you'll probably see, if there were any deductions, certain numbers that were deducted. And hopefully behind that check statement is the backup for all the deductions. So simple deductions can be turnover orders, like free cases you've given, right, for new stores. So that'll come as a deduction. If you've done any marketing, so let's just say you did one publication, that'll come as a deduction.
One publication through UNFI.
Through UNFI.
Right.
Even if you did an ad, say you did an ad through a retailer and they wanted to bill it through UNFI, it'll come as a deduction, because we're the bank for that retailer. The retailer's got money from us, now we have to collect it. Deductions can also be reclaim. So if products didn't sell and you had 10 cases left, that'll be a deduction. What else can you have? There's so many deductions.
If you short an order?
If you short an order and you didn't notify us. So that one, people say is very unfair, but let me explain the reason behind that. So you have a truck that's going to come pick up your products, right? The truck has got, it tries to maximize the capacity of that truck, right? The maximum capacity you can possibly have at the weight. And so your product is 1,000 pounds. The truck is coming to pick up 1,000 pounds of your product because that's the space it's allocated. And it comes and only picks up 400 pounds. Now it's lost 600 pounds of products that it could have picked up from another supplier. And so you're going to get charged. If you did not notify your buyer in time that they could notify the truck, you're going to get charged the freight charge for that. Because
As
it's
if you
lost,
had shipped it.
Yeah, because we've lost that ability to go pick up from someone else that could have given us that maximization.
So you got no sales, and you still have to pay to ship the air.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing I could tell you, read your paperwork. Read it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, because it's all written in the paperwork. That packet is pretty overwhelming, but you really read it. I had one supplier in my life since I've been working in this job 3 years now, she literally came to the meeting and she had highlighted every single thing. She had a question and she had printed everything out. But I commended her because she literally asked so many questions, because if you don't read it and you're so happy to get into distribution, and you just glaze over everything, then a lot of the things that happen to you afterwards, deduction, this fee or that fee, it's because you've missed it. It was there, written in the thing. And if you don't understand it, ask. And a lot of the deductions are all, if you haven't done a EDLP, everyday low price with a retailer, or if you haven't done a marketing, or if you haven't done a promotion, or you haven't given that free case, those deductions wouldn't happen. So the deductions a lot of time are because you gave permission for those deductions to happen.
So then one last question, then we're going to go to start with our Slack questions. OIs, off invoice. Yes. What is the expectation from UNFI that a brand participates in OIs?
So the norm standard is 4 OIs a year. So every quarter, a retail supplier is
For
promoted.
how many weeks?
It's a 4-week promotion,
Okay.
but it's probably a 5-week buying period.
Okay, so that means that for 4 to 5 weeks, that you've said when to UNFI, to your supplier manager, okay, for these 4 periods during the year, I'm going to give UNFI a discount of how much?
Standard is 15%.
15%. And is that optional? You're like, no thanks, I'll just pass on that.
Well, so with Next, you do have some flexibility, right? So next
I
week,
learned something. That's good.
So next we can say to you, so a couple of things that every supplier is expected to do, whether they're national or they're through Next, is a 90-day introductory promotion. So for 90 days, your product's going to be on sale or on a discount because we want to launch your product to the retailers, right? So that's already, in theory, 3 months of promotion that you've already provided us. So I usually will say, depending what time of the year you onboard.
Let me interject. You need to put that in your calculations, by the way.
Yes.
Like, you're on sale for a quarter of the year.
But that sounds very scary, but it really depends on the volume you're doing. So 3 months could be 1 PO. That's all it could be. I mean, it really depends. But if you're doing well, it could be 3 purchase orders. So that's, I mean, it's hard to tell you what that's really going to look like until we look at how you're moving.
Right. So just know going into, I think it's one of those things like being aware is really like Suman's point, like read the documentation, like go over it line by line, ask your supplier manager, but then also just understand the mechanics of how all this stuff works, because that way you won't be surprised when you're like, oh, well, I didn't know that I needed to promote off invoice or that there was going to be any deduction. I assumed if I sold, I thought I sold $100,000 worth of stuff, and then I get a check and it's for $85,000, and like, what? Where did the $15,000 go? I don't know.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's a bad surprise. We don't want those bad surprises.
Right.
Okay, so let's see. So Aaron Assad, how to avoid billing discrepancies? For example, we shipped 4 pallets of product, but UNFI said they only received 3. This is very common. This is not isolated to them at all. How do you talk with, like, how do you interface with your distributor around that?
So is this the one? Was it going to California?
Oh, this isn't a real thing.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
No, this is a real thing.
So there's a couple of things that could have happened, right? So if you're just one DC, so let's say you're Austin-based and you're going to the Lancaster DC, which is the Texas DC, South Dallas. The chances of, when we come pick up 4 pallets from you, the chances of that getting lost is slim, right? Because it's just going to that DC. However, if you're in multiple DCs, what will happen is we'll pick up from your location, take it to Lancaster, and let's say you're for them it's Moreno Valley and Lancaster. So we'll take both POs, both purchase orders, the pallets back to Lancaster, and then the Moreno Valley will go on another truck to Moreno Valley.
It's called cross-docking.
Cross-dock. And sometimes it can be 2 or 3 different warehouses, maybe 2 warehouses, and sometimes a pallet can be left behind. Normally it will get fucked, but for you guys, I mean, every time make sure your bill of lading specifically says the number of pallets, it's signed. Anytime there is a discrepancy, hopefully the buyers, the warehouse has reached out to you, they're supposed to. If not, the buyer can definitely see, because every time it enters a DC, it's logged, right? So we can tell, you know, I can tell, oh, 225 cases, that looks like a pallet that's lost. It's stuck in a warehouse and didn't make the truck to Moreno Valley. And normally it will get found maybe 4 or 5 days later. But anytime that's happened to any of my suppliers, I've reached out to I've looked at so I can do a report that says receiving report, and I'll see if it came in later. It was received in later, or I'll reach out to the buyer and say, hey, buyer, this one got paid 225 cases less. Do you know what happened? And he goes, oh, yeah, it came in and it's been received in. So that it'll come on the next check.
Yeah, so your records and actually making sure that every shipment that goes out, you have a signed bill of lading, you have documentation and evidence is very, very important. And because this is a peer-based community, I should point out that RJ and Joe back out here, they know a little bit about this. So like if you wanted to ask like some of the ins and outs of how you make sure that what you hoped got onto a truck actually got onto the truck and hopefully made it where you thought it was going and that sort of thing. There's, you know, like anything else, it's having watertight processes is a big
Another
big
thing
part
which
of that.
you can't, so you always want to make sure the PO number's always on your pallets. And if you've got 4 pallets, do that extra step and say 1 of 1, 1 of 4, 2 of 4, 3 of 4, 4 of 4. So that, you know, that they kind of know that PO has 4 pallets going to it or something.
Okay, next question. Besides my supplier relationship manager and buyer, who should I focus on developing a relationship with inside UNFI?
Accounts payable.
It's true. That's good stuff. Like, mic drop. Okay, so next question from Dustin. What reports should I be reviewing on a monthly basis to make sure I'm growing and stay healthy in my distributor relationship?
So if you're in just one DC at the beginning, I would say you can do a quarterly supplier breakout report. So that's a report that's sent to you. It will show you by DC, by item, by retailer, what you're moving out from our warehouse to that retailer. Now, there are some retailers that will not allow us to report on their behalf. And so they come under one line that says confidential. So Whole Foods is a great example. They do not allow us to report, so they're under confidential. But then Whole Foods, you can go into their supplier portal and look at their movement.
So the hack there is that you have
there is quite a few retailers that do not allow us,
and that's an important thing. So it's important for you as a brand to know that when you talk with someone from UNFI and they talk about their customers, they're not talking about you. They're talking about the retailers that they work with, and so they don't necessarily have to share anything that they don't want to share about their customers with you. You are a partner or a supplier to them and to their customers. And I think it's important to understand that dynamic because, like, you're part of their business, but you're not the main necessarily.
We do not. So I have many suppliers coming to me saying, hey, can you tell me what the pricing is for this customer? We don't share that. Now, you can go ask the retailer to share it with you, or you can, if they give permission to the account managers, they can share it with you. But
what do you mean by asking pricing?
So let's just say a retailer, a supplier is presenting to Wegmans, for example. They'll say, hey, Suman, what's Wegmans cost from UNFI?
Because
for your product.
So your product, let's say it retails in Texas at $4, and then all of a sudden it shows up on the shelf at Wegmans and it's $6, and you're like, what's up? What happened?
Or even when they want to make the presentation, right. They want to, say so. But we can't share that with you. So you have to ask the retailer for that pricing, or you can ask if the retailer gives the account manager permission, which is pretty rare, I think. They can share it with you, but we have to get that permission before we can share it.
Okay. So next, actually. We're gonna. This will be our last question for right now. Can 90-day introductory promo promo requirement be split among various promo structures? So, like 15% off, buy one get $1, like an actual dollar amount off.
It's off invoice.
It's all off invoice. So yeah. So that 90-day.
So I'll tell you the reason behind the 90-day promo is normally it's like 5 months ahead. So we work. It's publications. It's publications on literally hard publications, and then also on the customer portal that you're on promotion. It's called New Introductory Promotion. So the first publication is a new and now publication. Second month it's the DC specific monthly special promotion. And then the third month, it's the DC-specific monthly special promotion. And so that's why we ask for those promotions. It's kind of to try and get the retailers to look at you as a new item and try you as a new item on deal. And so, yeah, it's 3 months of publications. hopefully giving you visibility to why you, UNFI introduces 600 items every month. So what's going to make you stand out? If you're not in a publication, you've got into UNFI, how will people find you?
Yeah, so that's the way that, so UNFI works with, Billy Bob's Natural Foods in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, or something like that, and they're actually physically printing a catalog, and Billy Bob is sitting there, he's between customers.
So when I was at United Supermarkets, I never had time to look at everything. So, but I did love those publications because the publications had one-page ads. It had, a little bit of story maybe on a product. And I used to find a lot of new products through that way. They're also available on the customer portal. So people can digitally download it. And so, there's lots. So you just have to find ways to be seen.
Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time. Let's thank Suman.
Thank you.
For links to the people and companies we mentioned during our conversation today, be sure to visit barcodestartup.com/podcast for the show notes, a complete transcript of this conversation, and a PDF copy of the handout that accompanies this episode. And if you have a moment, please share, rate, and review the Barcode Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so more like-minded listeners can discover these conversations. Thanks again for listening to the Barcode Podcast, and we'll see you back here next week with a new conversation curated to equip emerging consumer brands.